Okay, now we're going to talk about the chassis itself, the metal parts, and how to put a finish on those. The chassis plate itself has a brush finish on it by yours truly. I actually brush every one of these myself. And a lot of people use it like that. I kind of like it. It's a little different. But if you don't like it, you can certainly paint it. And the nice thing about the brush job is that has pre-roughened it. So it's ready to go. You don't need to do any kind of sanding or anything to put some texture, a little tooth on there for your finish to grab onto. The other part you'll probably want to paint is the chassis, bell, transformer cover, whatever you want to call it. These guys are made from raw steel and they're given a protective coating, which is not done for beauty. You can see it's kind of a gooey, waxy, varnishy stuff that leaves some brown spots on some of the bells. And the easiest way to address that is to use something that's a degreaser, and I use acetone. You could use lacquer thinner, would work okay. I probably would tend to stay away from things like mineral spirits because they tend to leave a little bit of stuff on the surface, whereas acetone and lacquer thinner really take it off. Acetone is like pretty aggressive, so it's good stuff for that. But you do need to be careful with it, have good ventilation, and you want to wear gloves. I don't have the ideal gloves for acetone, which are latex gloves. That's the most resistant to acetone. I'm just wearing good old Playtex, Dexter's Mom kind of gloves here because that's what's around today, but I'm going to work pretty fast, so I'm not too concerned. I'm just going to get some acetone on a rag and start working on that finish and keep going until it seems like it's pretty well cleaned off and the rag is sliding over it without feeling sticky at all. When you do this, make sure you really get it tight into the corners so that you don't have anything underneath your paint finish still on there, any of this coating. You can't rub too much on this. So I'm going to go all the way around. And once I'm into this state, I'm pretty much ready for any way I might want to finish this. If you want to get experimental, you could try just hitting that with some steel wool to polish it up a little bit. If you want to get crazy, you can put it on a polishing wheel. You could shoot that with a clear finish. You have to get something on here. It's raw steel and it will rust, so definitely get a finish on this. This guy, we're just going to do the same paint that I'm going to shoot on the chassis today, which I'll be talking about in a minute. But before I do that, I want to have the same kind of tooth rough finish for the paint to help adhere. So I'm going to take a little good old 220 grit, that's what we had around here today, and I'm just going to rough this up a little bit. It doesn't have to be super aggressive, just get a little tooth on everything. Kind of start at the top. I'm going to kind of start at the top, work my way down so I make sure that I get it on all the surfaces. Work around the corners, make sure you get a little texture on the corners. The paint we're putting on, you don't need to worry about it looking like a super polished finish. The paint is going to fill in all of this bit of grain that we're adding to the surface. Okay, and then just to help clean off any of the little bit of grit we may have left on there, I'm just going to give that a real quick wipe again with acetone. That's cleaned up and ready to paint. And now I'm going to also do the degreasing treatment on my aluminum chassis panel. You don't want to leave this step out. Just even your own fingerprints can create a problem for the paint in terms of adhering. So once you get it done, don't pick it up barehanded. If you do, try and pick it up by the edges. Although we're going to make sure we get paint on the edges, so you want to hit those with the acetone as well. Okay. we have our parts nice and clean, and now we're going to take them outside to shoot some paint. Okay, we've moved outside to shoot this spray. Conditions are not perfect out here today. It's a spring day. It's a little cooler than you usually want to spray. You usually want it to be at least 65 degrees. It's about 55 degrees out here today. So I may not get the best finish in the world, but that's okay. We just want you to see how this goes on. You'll also notice I'm not wearing a respirator. You really should wear one of these. I'm just going to do this for clarity. It's kind of noisy out here, and we want you to be able to hear what I'm saying, so I'll hold my breath. Okay, we have our two pieces out here, and if you look at them on the table, I've masked the table off to keep it from getting spray paint, obviously, and you'll also notice that these pieces are raised up off the surface. I just put some little pieces of plastic under there to hold them up. That's going to allow me to spray around the edges of things, and it won't get glued to the table. We can just lift them off when they're dry. Now, the paint that I'm using is probably the most popular stuff for our kit builders, and it's because it's really easy to put on and it looks really cool. It's got a real retro vibe to it. It's a hammered finish paint. This one is Rust-Oleum Universal. There is, of course, Hammerite is the original one. There's maybe some other ones around too. You don't have to do this. You can powder coat if you're into that, if you've learned about it. I do DIY powder coats, a lot of fun. Takes some equipment to get set up, but it's not terribly expensive and the results are really fun. You can just leave the chassis panel naked, as I said. You could try bluing the bell end. That's a fun thing to do. You can go to a place where they sell gun bluing supplies and pick up the materials for that. It's not too tough to do, not too expensive. Anyway, we're going to do Hammerite because that's what looks really cool and we really like. So, temperature is, as I say, not ideal. We have just a little bit of breeze out here, which is not ideal. It's probably better to do these things indoors if you can and if you have the proper ventilation. But we'll make a go of this. So I'm going to really shake my can well. I've been shaking it for a while before we got going. And before we even touch this stuff, I want to talk a little bit about spraying. When you spray stuff with a rattle can or a spray gun, one of the rules is you start off the piece, you spray across at a consistent speed and a consistent distance, and you let go after you get off the piece. Otherwise, if you start spraying right here and then spraying right here, you're going to get big blobs of paint on there. You don't want to do that. So we're going to do just a nice, easy spray like that. This paint's a little funky, it's spitting a little bit, but with Hammerite, luckily, that's not too critical an issue because it's a hammered textured finish. Okay, I'm going to start on the little bell end here because it's a little bit easier to do. And what I'm going to do is spray around at a lower angle to make sure I get into these sides. And then we'll go back and start doing the top. And you'll notice that on each of these pieces, I'm going to kind of work my way around the table to do them. That's really the best way to go about it, to get an even coating everywhere. The first coat just needs to be a mist coat. It needs to cover about half the metal. 50% coat, it's also called. You don't want to build it a whole lot. We're going to do that. We're going to wait a few minutes. Then we're going to do another coat, about the same, maybe slightly heavier. And then we're going to finish with a heavy, medium heavy coat. And that's the one that we want to lay on and make sure that we have enough build that we'll get a nice hammered texture. So here we go with the first shot. Starting off the work, across, off the work, across, let off. Gonna come around the table. Just like that. We're gonna let that sit a little bit. We'll come over to the big panel. Start off the work. And I'm gonna do my first shot low around the edge. Then I'm gonna come up, overlapping about 50% on these, like so. And I'm going to come around and do it from this angle. You'll notice I'm keeping the can pretty far away. You probably want to keep it at least a foot away from the surface. I'm going to give a little shot along this edge just to get some coat on there, and another little shot. Okay, we're going to let that sit a few minutes, and then we'll come back to it and put our second coat on. I've waited a couple, 3 minutes. It doesn't have to get super dry between the first and second coat. So I'm going to go ahead and do exactly the same thing and just build a little more of the paint on the surface without going crazy. So here we go. Okay, and we get our big panel. Again, getting a low angle on the first shot so we get the edge. I'm just going to go around it this time, make sure I get those edges on this second run, and then we'll go over the top. Okay, now we'll do one full pass over the top with the second coat. Freeze is making this a little challenging, but I think we'll pull it off. Okay, we're going to wait a few more minutes and then we'll hit that final coat on there. Okay, we're going to do our final coat on this, which is kind of critical in that you want to try and be real consistent on how much you lay on. You don't want to go crazy, but you want to make sure you get good full coverage on here. So, same process as before, just lay on a little bit more. Here we go. This time on that bell end, I'm going to go over the top a little higher to make sure I get a good coverage on the top of the bell, since that's the thing we're really going to look at. Okay, the bell's been easy to shoot. The chassis panel's given me a little more challenge today because of the temperature, so I'm going to make sure I get enough on there to get a good coverage. We're already getting a really nice hammer on the bell with that heavy coat. It's just popping right out. It's going to look pretty good. Here we go. Okay, there's one side, and again, I'm going to do this from a couple angles. Sometimes you'll see what looks like little fish eyes, little places where you can see the metal through popping up. Those usually level out as it sits and dries, so don't be too concerned about that. If you don't get enough build on these, on the final coat, what's going to happen is you're going to get a real fine textured finish. And you can actually do that by building a whole bunch of mist coats if you don't want that real heavy hammer texture. But I like the hammer texture, so I'm going to lay it on there. I'm going to give a little more along this edge just to make sure. And I think we're good. So what you want to do now is just let these sit and get dry. And the thing about hammerite is it cures pretty slowly. Really, the very best technique with this stuff is let it sit for at least a week. And actually, if you let it sit for 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to be guaranteed that it's not going to break up and chip up on you when you're working on it. If you're in a hurry, you can bake it to accelerate the polymerization process, but be a little careful. Don't put it in a real hot oven to try and speed up the process. Probably keep it at 200 degrees or below, and I wouldn't leave it in there for more than about 20 minutes or half an hour. If you go too far, we've found that it actually gets too brittle and it'll start to crack sometimes. So use a little caution on that. And there you go. That's how you do a paint job on Bottlehead chassis panels. Pretty simple.